The hospital room was quiet. Only the soft beeping of machines filled the air. Margaret was taking her final breaths. Her white family stood solemnly around her, a daughter weeping at the edge of the bed, a son staring blankly, fighting back, tears. Then the door opened. A tall black man stepped inside. He said nothing. No nod, no greeting. Just walked straight to Margaret's bedside. The entire room froze. All eyes locked on him, confused, stunned. And then he spoke, and just one sentence, "I'm her husband." For a moment, time stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. Just the sound of that one truth hanging heavy in the air. 20. Years earlier, Margaret was browsing the poetry aisle of a quiet little bookstore in downtown Chicago. She always came there on Sundays. It was her escape from the noise of the world. That's where she first saw him. Elijah. Tall, calm. Flipping through a copy of Langston Hughes, she watched as he smiled softly at the words. She couldn't help but speak. "Do you like poetry?" she asked. He looked up, surprised, and then smiled back. "I don't just like it. I live in it." That was the beginning. They sat in the cafe next door that same afternoon, talking for hours about books, life, and the strange loneliness of being misunderstood. Margaret had never met someone like him. He listened, really listened, and he spoke with a gentleness that made her heart feel safe. Soon, Sundays weren't enough. Their bookstore chats turned into long phone calls that stretched past midnight, candlelit dinners at his apartment, walks by the lake hand in hand, where the city lights shimmered on the water and the world finally made sense. But it wasn't simple. Margaret was white, Elijah was black, and this was a time and a place where people still whispered when they saw love like theirs. Margaret's family didn't know. Not really. She had mentioned a friend once or twice, but never. By name, never with the truth, because she knew what would happen. Her parents, especially her father, were proud, traditional people. They believed in image, reputation, keeping things proper. To them, love had rules, and Margaret's love broke every one of them. So they loved in secret, for years, not because they were ashamed, but because the world still hadn't earned the right to see something this pure. They created a world of their own, weekends away in quiet cabins, holidays just the two of them, anniversaries marked not by public parties, but by handwritten letters left under pillows. It wasn't the life Margaret had imagined, but it was real, and it was theirs. Margaret had always known her family carried darkness, but she never imagined love would force her to face it. At dinners, she'd sit silently, heart pounding, as her relatives made cruel jokes, laughing about people they didn't understand, spitting venom disguised as tradition. Every word felt like a knife, and Elijah, the man she loved, was the target they didn't know they had. She never told them about him, not because she was ashamed of Elijah, but because she was terrified of them, their hate, their judgment, what they might do if they found out. So she lived in silence, hiding smiles that belonged to him, sneaking out under the stars to hold his hand, whispering promises in the dark, because daylight wasn't safe. They couldn't go on like that forever. So one quiet afternoon, with trembling hands and tearful vows, Margaret and Elijah said, "I do." No church bells, no family, just two hearts against the world. From then on, Margaret lived a double life, a daughter in the daylight, a wife in the shadows, and every day the weight of hiding the truth slowly began to break her. The silent husband who loved without recognition, Elijah wasn't the kind of man who needed attention. He didn't chase praise or applause, he just loved. Every morning, before Margaret even opened her eyes, the smell of toast and fresh eggs would drift through the hallway. He made her breakfast like a ritual, never rushed, always with care. A folded napkin, her favorite tea, and sometimes a little note with a quote from her favorite poet. He read poetry aloud at night, not because he loved the words, but because she did, because her eyes would light up with wonder, and that was enough for him. He folded her laundry. He remembered her mother's birthday. Even though he'd never been invited to the celebration, he listened, really listened when she spoke, even when her words were tangled in guilt and fear. But Elijah lived in the margins of her life. No pictures of them on Instagram, no tags, no posts, no public smiles, no hand-holding in daylight, no stolen kisses at family gatherings, because he wasn't allowed at family gatherings. Christmases passed without him, Thanksgivings filled with empty chairs and silent tears. And yet, he never complained. Not once did Elijah ask, "Why do you hide me? Why can't I be part of your world? Why don't they know I'm your husband?" He knew. He knew what Margaret was up against, the prejudice, the pressure, the fear. And instead of blaming her for the cage she'd been raised in, he stood beside her quietly, holding the key, waiting for the day she'd be ready to unlock it. His love wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or public declarations. It came in soft, consistent gestures. A cup of water beside the bed, a coat draped on her shoulders when it got cold, a tired smile after a long day, even when his own day had been harder. He loved with no conditions, no timelines, no ultimatums, but that didn't mean he didn't hurt. Some nights when Margaret was asleep, he'd stare at the ceiling, wondering what it felt like to be loved out, loud, to be claimed, to be introduced as my husband, instead of being hidden behind excuses and fear. Yet when morning came, he was back in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, humming softly to himself, grateful for whatever piece of her he was allowed to have. Because for Elijah, love wasn't about being seen by the world. It was about showing up, even when the world refused to see him. Margaret's health declines. It started with exhaustion. Margaret thought it was stress, maybe anxiety, but the fatigue grew heavier, lingering, stealing her breath, her energy, her spark. Then came the diagnosis. A quiet room, a doctor's tone too soft to mean anything good. She sat frozen, staring at a medical report with words that didn't feel real, chronic, degenerative. No cure, just management. Elijah was right there, holding her hand, calm as ever, driving her to every appointment, waiting in every lobby, wiping her tears before she even noticed they'd fallen. He researched her medications, tracked her symptoms, cooked the bland foods the doctors recommended. Even when she pushed the plate away in frustration, he wrapped her in blankets when chills came. He sat beside her when the nights were long and the pain was loud, but even in sickness, she still hid him. In hospital corridors, she introduced him as a friend. When her family called, she'd lie, "Oh, just a nurse helping out. Oh, I'm doing fine. Don't worry about me." Elijah never argued, never asked her to correct the lie, even as his heart broke a little more each time she pretended he wasn't hers. He saw it all, her weakness, her fear, her slow decline, and yet he never left. Not when her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold a glass, not when she lashed out in pain and sadness, not even when it became clear she might never get better. He was always there, soft-spoken, steady, and invisible to the world, loving her more in her weakness than he ever did in her strength, because that's who Elijah was, the kind of man who stayed even when no one asked him to, even when it hurt. Her last wish, a letter to her family. Margaret always knew the day would come, the day when time would run out, when she'd have to say goodbye without truly being seen. She could feel her body growing weaker, a little more each morning, a little less laughter in her breath, a little more pain in her silence. But even as her bones ached and her world dimmed, her mind was clear, sharp with the things she had never said. One evening when Elijah had gone home to grab fresh clothes, she asked the nurse for a pen and paper. It was shaky at first, her hand trembling, her eyes misty, but slowly the words poured out. "To my family, if you're reading this and I'm gone or nearly there, I don't know how to begin because I never really gave you the truth. I was afraid of your rejection, afraid of your hate. But I loved someone who deserved to be loved in the light. His name is Elijah. He is my husband, the man who made me breakfast every morning, who held me through pain you never even knew I had, who stayed even when I gave him nothing but silence in return. You never saw him because I never let you, and that is my greatest regret. He wasn't invisible. I made him invisible, to protect you. But in doing so, I failed to protect him. I failed to protect us. When the time comes, let Elijah say goodbye. Don't shut him out. Don't erase him from the story. He deserves that moment. Not for closure, he's had none, but for love, because he never stopped giving it. Please don't let me leave this world pretending he didn't exist. She folded the letter slowly, her breath shallow, her eyes tired. Then she turned to the nurse, the only one who truly knew what Elijah meant to her. When it's close, she whispered, let him in, please. No matter what anyone says. Let him in. The nurse nodded, her own eyes brimming with tears. She had watched their quiet love unfold in hospital rooms, in hushed words and held hands, a kind of love that didn't demand attention but deserved everything. And as the hours ticked away, Margaret clung to one hope, that in the end love would speak louder than fear, the moment of truth. The day arrived like a quiet storm, grey skies, a soft drizzle. The kind of morning that felt like the world already knew what was coming. Elijah stood outside the hospital for a long time, staring up at the windows, wondering if she was looking out, waiting, or already fading. In his hand, he held the wedding ring she never wore outside. He never asked her to. He never needed the world to know. He just needed her to know, and she always did. Inside, Margaret's room was still. Machines beeped rhythmically. Nurses moved quietly, and her family had gathered, finally called in when the doctors said it could be any moment now. They stood by her bed, whispering prayers, regrets. But none of them knew the full truth until the elevator doors opened, and Elijah stepped in. He wasn't wearing black. He didn't walk like a man full of drama or rage. He walked slowly, heavy-hearted, as if every step toward that room meant walking through years of silence. And into the light, Margaret's sister was the first to notice him. "Can I help you?" she asked sharply, eyeing the stranger like an intruder. Elijah looked at her, then at the rest of the family gathered by the door, and softly he said, "I'm Elijah." "I'm Margaret's husband." The words fell like thunder in the hallway. "What?" her brother snapped, her mother's face twisted in confusion. "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" But Elijah didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself with anger or pride. "She married me," he said gently, "years ago in secret, because she was afraid you'd hate her for loving me." He paused, then added, "She was right." The room fell silent, a silence louder than shouting. Shock painted every face, then came the disbelief. Impossible. She wouldn't lie to us like that. But Elijah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. Margaret's handwriting, faint but clear. The letter. He handed it to the nurse, the one Margaret had trusted, the one who had promised to deliver it if the family turned cold. The nurse looked at the family, then unfolded the paper. She began to read Margaret's words, aloud. Each sentence cut deeper than the last. Confessions of fear, of hiding, of love that had lived in the shadows, and a final plea, when the time comes, let Elijah say goodbye. Margaret's mother began to cry, but it wasn't the gentle cry of grief. It was the pained sob of someone realizing they'd never known their daughter at all. Her father turned his back to the wall, shaking his head, still refusing to believe. Her sister's eyes welled with tears, not from hatred, but from guilt. Guilt for every joke, every cruel word, every time she'd wondered why Margaret never brought anyone home. And yet, Elijah stood still, not accusing, not demanding anything. "I don't want to fight," he whispered. "I just want to hold her hand, the way I've always done, even if none of you ever saw it." That's when the nurse stepped aside and the family, though stunned, shattered, and some still silently seething, moved, not out of acceptance, but maybe, just maybe, out of shame. Elijah walked into the room. Margaret lay there, pale, still but peaceful, like she'd been waiting, holding on for just this moment. He took her hand gently, pressed his forehead against it, and closed his eyes. Years of hiding, years of sacrifice, and finally truth, not shouted, not posted online, not performed for the world, but lived quietly, deeply, and now, completely. The room was still. Elijah sat beside Margaret's bed, her frail hand resting in his, the warmth of her skin fading too quickly. And yet, there was something he hadn't done. Something she had asked for. Long before the illness, before the hospital, even before the letter, he reached into the worn leather satchel he had brought with him, and from it, he pulled out a small wooden box. It was nothing extravagant, no gold, no carvings, just a simple box weathered with time, edges softened by the years. He placed it gently on the bedside table and opened it. Inside, a quiet storm of proof. He pulled out a photo, creased but cherished. It was their wedding day. Margaret wore a soft white dress, simple but elegant, Elijah in a navy blue suit, smiling the way only a man in love could. No crowd, no grand ceremony. Just two souls promising the world to each other, alone yet complete. Gasps echoed behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He took out a folded stack of letters, dozens, all in Margaret's handwriting, some short, some pages long, all addressed to my Elijah. He opened one and read softly, "I wish I could scream your name from the rooftops, but for now I'll whisper it into my pillow and hope that's enough." The silence in the room deepened. No one interrupted, not even her mother. He continued pulling out the contents of the box, a delicate bracelet he had given her on their first anniversary, a tiny origami rose she once made during a picnic in the park. The two wedding rings, hers, tucked into a velvet pouch, his worn proudly on his hand all these years. Every item told a story, of birthdays celebrated in candlelight, of tears dried without witnesses, of a love that refused to die even when hidden. One by one, faces around the room began to change. Tears welled in the eyes that once held judgment. Hearts once hardened by prejudice started to crack. Her sister stepped closer, hands trembling as she looked at the photo. "I had no idea," she whispered. Elijah nodded gently, his voice barely above a breath. "She didn't want to lose you, but she didn't want to lose me either." Then came the tears, not just his, but theirs. Tears for what they didn't know. Tears for what they missed. Tears for the quiet, hidden life that had been right beside them, unseen. And in that moment, the box became more than memories. It became the truth they could no longer deny. It was love, undeniable, unshakable, and real. His final words. The air was heavy. No one dared speak. All eyes were on Elijah, still seated beside Margaret, his hand still holding hers, now cold and still. He didn't cry, not in the way most people do. His grief was silent, deep, dignified. He looked around the room at the faces that had once never known his name, some ashamed, some still stunned, some simply trying to understand. Then he stood, slowly, like every movement carried the weight of the years they never gave him. Turned to them, voice calm but full of soul. "Even if you never saw me," he paused. The silence swallowed the room. She did. He glanced down at Margaret, a bittersweet smile on his face. And to her, that was enough. He took her hand one last time, brought it to his lips and kissed it gently. Then, leaning down, he pressed his lips to her forehead. It was more than a goodbye. It was a thank you. A promise, a final offering of a love that never asked for recognition, only to be real. Then, without another word, Elijah walked toward the door. No dramatic exit, no angry speech, just silence. But in that silence he left behind something louder than words, a memory, a truth, a quiet kind of love that didn't need to shout to be felt. As the door closed behind him, Margaret's mother sat down, eyes filled with tears. For the first time she saw what her daughter had seen all along, and it was beautiful. The room remained still long after Elijah left, but something had changed. Margaret's sister slowly walked back to the small wooden box. She opened it again, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the photographs. One by one, they passed them around. There was Margaret, beaming, sitting beside Elijah on a park bench, dancing barefoot in a living room, laughing with a joy they had never seen in her before. She was radiant, alive, loved, and they had missed it all. Her father stared at a letter she'd written to Elijah on their second anniversary. He didn't say a word, just wiped the corner of his eye with shaking hands. Her mother held the wedding photo close to her chest, whispering apologies she would never get to speak aloud. The air was filled with grief, but not just for her death, for the years stolen by ignorance, for the love they never honored, for the man they never accepted. And suddenly, all the jokes, the comments, the hateful traditions passed down through generations, they felt so small, so powerless compared to what Margaret and Elijah had built in the quiet corners of their hidden world. No spotlight, no recognition, just love. As the box sat open on the table and her smiling face looked up from every photo, the family finally understood. She had chosen love over fear, over shame, over them, and in the end, she may have left in silence, but her love spoke louder than any hate ever could.